On Thursday, President Donald Trump announced on Truth Social that he is ordering the Commerce Department to work on a new census that would exclude persons who are illegally in our country illegally. Nice typo. It's often difficult to know from a social media post what Trump intends, but the president seems to be asking for a mid-decade census and would not count undocumented immigrants. There are just two problems with that idea. It is unconstitutional and it is logistically impossible. Yeah, my understanding is that the census is like an incredibly large undertaking that takes hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to actually fully like flesh out. And so the idea that Trump can just unilaterally be like, yeah, we're just going to have another census. Yeah, whatever. Let's just do it now. And like the idea of like funding or the logistics or anything else that goes behind like putting on a census isn't actually considered at all. It's just like, well, I just want a census, guys. Almost like it's like picking up a candy bar at the local store. Like, oh, can you grab me a candy bar when you're over there? Oh yeah, let's just do another census real quick, guys. No problem. The census of the U.S. population has many uses. Federal and state governments allocate money to communities based on their populations. Businesses use population forecasts to make decisions on where to expand. Law enforcement uses population counts to calculate crime rates and inform policing decisions. Health officials use the data to calculate disease rates to know where outbreaks occur and to send help. But Trump's idea concerns the census's effect on political power. The federal government allocates congressional seats to states, which draw equal population congressional and other districts using census population numbers. The most reasonable interpretation of the president's missive is that he wants to affect the 2026 midterm elections. After all, Trump is pushing this amid the drama surrounding Texas redistricting efforts. There, Democratic state legislatures have fled the state to deny Republicans a quorum needed to adopt a new congressional map, with the intended effect to tilt the table slightly towards the GOP in what will most likely be a challenging 2026 election environment. I agree. So, like, if you're not like super deep into politics and haven't followed what Trump has been doing over the last however many years, you might see this sentence that says the most reasonable interpretation of the president's missive is that he wants to affect the 2026 midterms and be like, oh man, I don't know, that's pretty cynical. Like, I don't know if I would, if I would be quite that cynical, if I would have that outlook on it. Like, that's a pretty hard outlook to have. But like within the context of what he tried to do to overthrow the 2020 election results, the whole fake slate of electors theme in Georgia and whatnot, I mean, that is because of all of that. This is the only reasonable interpretation of that. If he never did all of that, then you could have some level of plausible deniability about the reasoning behind why he would want to do this sort of thing. But because of he tried to steal the 2020 election, because he tried the fake elector scheme, because he tried to get Mike Pence to just put him in, just say he won, even though he didn't win. I think the only reasonable interpretation about the reasoning behind why he wants to do this is the fact that he wants to cynically sway the results of the upcoming 2026 midterms, and likely the 2028 general election. A new census, similarly, would result in a different allocation of congressional seats to the states and another round of redistricting throughout the country. Yet it is difficult to know with certainty how excluding undocumented immigrants would affect population counts, since the Census Bureau does not ask about people's legal status. The conventional wisdom, and presumably the president's view, is that these people largely reside in Democratic areas, meaning these communities would be adversely affected. Yeah, there's no good faith, reasonable reason why. As this article points out, the U.S. Census numbers are not exclusively for redistricting and political purposes, right? They're used for all sorts of other things, right? As the article says, businesses use population forecasts to make decisions on where to expand. Well, of course, illegal people who are here illegally still spend money and still solicit businesses in whatever area they happen to live in. I mean, they exist, they do things, they're a part of society. So in that sense, these businesses want those numbers to be accurate to the amount of people that are there that could, solicit their business, including illegals. Same thing goes for how the law enforcement uses population counts to calculate crime rates and inform policing decisions. Obviously, undocumented and illegal immigrants commit crime as well, right? The rate. My understanding is that they commit crimes at a much lower rate than native-born American citizens. But put that aside entirely for a second. Of course, some percentage of illegal and undocumented people are going to commit crime just because just any group of any people, some percentage of them is going to commit crime. And so, in that sense, you want to have an accurate count of whoever's here legally and illegally, insofar as it affects how law enforcement and the amount of resources they need to allocate, how much policing they need to do, how much patrolling, yada yada, all the details. And same thing goes for the health officials that use the data to calculate disease rates and know where outbreaks occur and send help. What if we have another COVID type pandemic outbreak, and then the census numbers are all screwed up? And then, it's not going to I don't know if it would completely upend our ability to deal with something like that, but I worry that it would definitely negatively influence our ability. We would necessarily under or over count the amount of deaths or disease rate or the spread or the risk of the spread in certain areas, because our census numbers would be all off, because our understanding of exactly how many real human beings, not illegal or legal people, how many human beings that could be vectors for disease or crime or solicitors of local businesses or whatever, how are they affected? They are an important part of the societal equation. And insofar as census is a long-term planning tool, you want it to be as comprehensive and as detailed as possible, including illegal and undocumented people. And so the fact that he's doing all of this to try and get more GOP, he's doing this, Trump wants to do this for purely political reasons, right? He wants the GOP to have more seats. He wants, like it said, he wants, the conventional wisdom is that these people are largely reside in Democratic areas, meaning these communities would be adversely affected. Basically, the idea is that they're going to undercount these areas, and so therefore the census will reallocate the amount of congressional seats that go to each state or whatever, and then they get to redraw all the districts and then basically gerrymander their way into having more seats in the House. But yeah, the fact that the whole idea of this, what are the pros and cons, right? The pros from their perspective are very clear, right? The gerrymandering, they get extra seats in the House, they get extra power and control over the government. The pros are very clear for them, all right? The cons are non-existent because they're the people in power, they're the ruling class. They don't care about, the adverse effects of a bad census, and the knock-on effects that it can have. But those are undeniably factual cons, right? This necessarily will happen, right? If we do a census recount that within this context, then it will necessarily create a scenario in which Republicans gerrymander and gain seats at the expense of the practical societal logistics and whatnot that the census provides to people. There are real legitimate cons to all of this, but the fact that they don't care about any of that. They don't care about the American people. They're not coming at this from a good faith perspective, but it's just a different perspective, right? They're coming at this from pure cynicism, from pure power grab, from pure metagame analysis perspective. What can we do to maximize our control? Bar none. We don't care. This is why I keep coming back to, I don't think the Republican Party cares very much about PR anymore, or at least it's not so much the Republican Party doesn't care about PR, but it's that the era of people caring about PR and that kind of thing seems to be gone, right? I would think that 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, even the Republican Party, even the base of the Republicans probably understood why the census was done exactly the way it is, right? No, I'm not exactly sure about that. I mean, people were stupid back then too. I just worry that we have such extreme media saturation at this point that the ability for people to make these connections, to see on one hand, oh, they're just trying to cynically do this to gerrymander and gain seats at the expense of all these other things. But people, there's such a deep media saturation that coming to that conclusion, making that analysis and that connection requires the media to be presenting things to you correctly, requires you to be getting the correct inputs information wise. But because they're so saturated with so much BS media that people are not getting the correct, most of people are not getting the correct inputs, and therefore they're not going to be able to make this connection. And therefore this sort of thing, which I think would ostensibly be bad PR and just be an objectively bad decision, because you're clearly cynically trying to use the levers of government and the way that elections are run and whatnot in the census to cynically give yourself more power with no plausibly deniable other reason, right? I don't know. It's just it's so brazen and just so lazy. And they aren't even trying to hide the ball with it. Not even a little bit. Regardless of which districts are affected, asking for a new census does not magically create one. That's what I'm saying. The logistics behind a census are tremendous. It's the idea that you just ask for one or say that we're going to have another one, and then it's just going to happen, and then everything else falls in line, and that there's no other no other work beyond that that needs to be done is just ridiculous. Congress has to appropriate money. With red states and members representing red districts affected, it is unclear there are even enough votes to pass enabling legislation. And this is before Republican-aligned organizations like business and law enforcement groups pressure Republican members of Congress to provide reliable population counts that would be jeopardized by the redistricted resources needed to conduct a slapdash census. That's it. Yes, this is exactly what I'm saying, right? This causes a number of knock-on effects. The census is more than just for redistricting, and that even in the Republican districts that ostensibly are benefiting from this sort of gerrymandering are going to be negatively affected by all the cons. Then the Census Bureau has to design and conduct a census, planning, hiring, and training tens of thousands of census takers, and tabulating the collected numbers takes time. Indeed, we know how much time is required since the Census Bureau is already planning when it will next conduct a census in 2030. Even in the extremely unlikely scenario Congress would appropriate money for the Census Bureau could produce new population counts, states would still need to draw new districts, and these new districts would have to be in place before 2025 primaries candidate filing deadlines, which are months away. So yeah, it's 100% not going to be able to come together in time. No way. The speed at which this legislature moves when it comes to detailed things like this, there's no way. The barriers to conducting a sweeping mid-decade redistricting before the 2026 elections are just simply insurmountable. Most likely is that Trump intends to affect how the 2030 census is conducted, and there is enough lead time to change that census. However, Trump's proposed change to exclude undocumented immigrants, whatever year the census is conducted, is unconstitutional. Section 2 of the 14th Amendment clearly states that congressional seats are to be appropriated by the whole number of persons in each state. Yeah, okay. That seems completely uninterpretable, right? That seems extremely clear. It's not like the Second Amendment where it's got that clause in it where it's like a well-regulated militia, and then you and your homies can debate whether that the Founding Fathers really meant like your average everyday person can have a gun, or like the militias should have access to arms or whatever. That is a reasonable difference of interpretation of the wording that people can come to. But when it says the whole number of persons in each state, there is no way that you could legally interpret that to be like, oh, but only the legal persons, right? Not the undocumented persons, not the people who are here illegally, right? There's no way. And there's no way that they're going to get an amendment overturned. That's of course not going to happen. And so, yeah, the idea that this is going to happen is, I just don't see this happening. This seems just like a pipe dream. Trump's directive will be litigated, which poses yet another logistical barrier. The Supreme Court has sided with Trump on high-profile cases that consolidate his presidential power. Like Trump, it is difficult to read the minds of the 6 conservative justices. Still, these justices will have a difficult time dismissing the Constitution's plain language. Yeah, this perfectly exemplifies how I would describe my feelings on this, right? There's no way that they could possibly interpret this amendment and this piece of legislation in this sort of way. But on the other hand, these justices have proven to be absolute lunatics and complete Trump sycophants. So it's kind of all up in the air, right? Things that we thought were kind of obvious in the legal realm have turned out not to be obvious when it comes to the Supreme Court. So I don't know. You never know. If I were to guess what would happen, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick will order the Census Bureau to explore adding a question to the 2030 census asking for people's legal status in the country. Congress may still need to pass enabling legislation, since adding a question is costly. Some people are already fearful to respond to the census, which leads to undercounts of immigrant communities. The addition of a legal status question would further deter their willingness to participate. In this scenario, the legal questions about using the data for apportionment and redistricting would be cans to be kicked down the road until the next president releases the population counts of the 2030 census. It would only be then that population counts could be used to apportion congressional seats to states and for redistricting. Advocacy groups representing immigrant communities would still most likely file lawsuits, though alleging the addition of the status question negatively affects participation in the decennial census, thereby undermining the federal government's 14th Amendment mandate. Just because the president says he wants an immediate census does not make it so. Although it seems to be the case with, you would think that's the case with his unilateral cutting or shutting down of certain executive agencies. And you would also say the same thing about his sort of just whole cloth creation of the Doge people or whatever. You would say that about that stuff, right? Just because he says it does not make it so. But for a lot of those, it sort of ended up making it so. So I'm mostly on the side of this person in their analysis, but also the point they said earlier were like, you never know. The Supreme Court has sided with Trump on high-profile cases that consolidate his power. Like, I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, this seems just incredibly short-sighted and just sort of perfectly indicative of how this administration is handling just governance in general, right? They're just not hiding the ball anymore. Any cynical, weird, bad faith reasoning that they had behind other pieces of legislation in the past, they're no longer hiding behind the plausible deniability. They don't have to anymore. So with something like this, they don't even need to come up with some complicated reasoning as to why the undocumented or illegal immigrants need not be on the census. They don't even need to pretend. They can just be totally straightforward about it. Like, we just want more states. We just want a gerrymander, guys. Come on. We have the Supreme Court, we have the House, we have the Senate, we have the presidency. Come on, guys. We can gerrymander to all heck. Let's make it happen.